Good morning, fifth grade. Today we are going to take a step back from our Civil War text, and we actually have two supplemental texts that we will be reading. You can find those located in your in the back of your packet. So the first text we're going to read is The Two Harriets, and that should be on your back page of your packet. You can go ahead and rip that off. And then we're going to do the quick write. It says, have you ever written someone a letter? Why did you write it? Did the recipient write you back? How did it feel? Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the focus question. We want to know what is the main idea of the text. We have 3 vocabulary words today. The first one is influential. That is someone who has influence, probably someone who is famous or has a lot of money. You would draw a line to this Time cover that says the most influential people in the world. Our second vocabulary word is primary source, and that is an original document from history. So this newspaper article is a primary source because it's from the past, and it was written in the past. The last vocabulary word is secondary source, and that's a source that's printed after an event. So the Civil War dictionary is you could get information about the Civil War, but it's not from the Civil War. That would be a primary source. Great, turn the page, and you should have your Two Harriets text out with the Two Harriets questions. So let's get ready to read. The first question I'm looking for is, how does the author describe Harriet Tubman's work after the Civil War? Great. Many people fought against slavery in the United States. They were called abolitionists because they wanted to abolish or get rid of slavery. 2 of the best-known abolitionists were both named Harriet, Harriet Beecher Stowe and Harriet Tubman. Harriet Beecher Stowe was the 6th of 11 children, born to a minister and his wife. She was just 5 years old when her mother died. At age 13, she started going to a school founded by her sister where she learned to be a teacher and started writing. She wrote her first book at age 22. In 1852, her novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin, was published. It quickly became a bestseller. Indeed, it was the most popular book in America. Although the book was fiction, it was based on the lives of real people. The novel tells the story of several slaves, but its main character is Tom, a man with a wife and children. Tom is separated from his family and sold to one plantation owner after another. The last of his owners is a cruel man named Simon Legree. Legree orders Tom to beat the other slaves on his plantation. Tom refuses, so Legree beats Tom. Legree orders his hired hands, called overseers, to kill Tom. When Tom dies, several of the other characters in the book escape from slavery by traveling north to Canada via what was called the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad was not an actual railroad, but a network of people who helped shelter and guide slaves to freedom. Next page. Stowe's novel moved many readers and inspired them to speak out against slavery. Many plays were performed based on the novel's characters, but her book angered people in the South, and historians believed it helped lead the Southern states to break away from the North a decade later, which marked the beginning of the Civil War. Uncle Tom's Cabin was so influential that when President Abraham Lincoln met Stowe in 1862, he is supposed to have said, "So you're the little woman who wrote the book that started this great war." Like Harriet Beecher Stowe, Harriet Tubman was one of 11 children. Both of Harriet Tubman's parents were slaves on a plantation in Maryland. Tubman began working at 6 years old, rented out by her master as a weaver. As a teenager, she began working in the fields on the plantation. She suffered many beatings at the hands of the plantation's overseers, which caused permanent damage. Learning that the plantation owner planned to sell her and her brothers, she tried to escape. Guided only by the North Star in the sky, she made her way to Pennsylvania, frequently on foot. But Tubman was not content simply to live in freedom. She became active in the Underground Railroad Harriet Beecher Stowe had written about. Just 1 year after her escape, she returned to the South to rescue her sister and her sister's 2 children. Then she returned once again for her brother. Some time later, she returned yet again to rescue her parents. It was not just her family she helped to become free. She wanted to help other slaves to escape. She returned to the South 19 times. The exact number of slaves Harriet Tubman led to freedom is unknown. A 19th century biography stated she rescued 300 slaves, while modern historians estimate the total was closer to 70. During the Civil War, Tubman worked for the Union Army as a nurse and a cook. She also became a spy. In one daring mission, she learned the position of the Confederate Army along the Combahee River in South Carolina and traveled in a gunboat with hundreds of Union soldiers as they freed about 750 slaves. Both Harriets lived fruitful lives long past the Civil War. Harriet Beecher Stowe continued to write, publishing more than 30 books. In her 80s, Harriet Tubman opened a nursing home in her adopted home of Auburn, New York, for older African Americans. Both spoke out for women's rights, but Harriet Tubman and Harriet Beecher Stowe are now recognized for their different but important roles in ending slavery in the United States of America. All right, so let's go to our questions. Question number 1 says, how does the author describe Harriet Tubman's work after the Civil War? And if we go back to this last paragraph, it says that Harriet Tubman opened a nursing home in Auburn, New York for older African Americans. So we would underline that and write a number 1 out beside it, and then we would get ready to write our quote in 1A. In her 80s, Harriet Tubman opened a nursing home in her adopted hometown of Auburn, New York, for older African Americans. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for 1B. It says, what do Harriet Tubman's actions reveal about her as a person? And so if Harriet Tubman is, if she escaped from slavery and she went back into the South to rescue several more slaves and guide them to freedom, we would say that she is a brave person, but she's also compassionate. She didn't have to go back and get her family or rescue other slaves, but she did so because she cared about other people, which means that she's compassionate. So we could say Tubman was a heroine. She was brave and determined to end slavery. And you could also add in 1B that she's compassionate. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for 2A. That should say 2. It says, how does the author describe, and that should say Harriet Beecher Stowe's. How does the author describe Harriet Beecher Stowe's work after the Civil War? And so we would go back into that paragraph that talks about how Stowe's novel, that she continued to write books, to speak out against slavery. So that's what we would write for 2A. Harriet Beecher Stowe continued to write books and speak out against slavery. Press pause to write down your answer for 2A and play when you are ready for 2B. And instead of Harriet Tubman, it should say Harriet Beecher Stowe. What did Harriet Beecher Stowe's actions reveal about her as a person? And we would say that Harriet Beecher Stowe was brave and determined to end slavery. That bravery piece talks, she wrote a book that was very controversial, but also influential, and it took a lot of courage to speak out against slavery where she was. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for number 3. It says, how did Harriet Tubman help end slavery? And if we go back in our text, it talks about how Harriet Tubman became a conductor on the Underground Railroad to rescue slaves and help them escape to freedom. And so in number 3, we would write down Harriet Tubman helped end slavery by leading slaves to freedom on the Underground Railroad and serving as in the Union Army as a spy during the Civil War. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for number 4. And again, this should say Harriet Beecher Stowe. How did Harriet Beecher Stowe help end slavery? And if we go back to the top of the second page, it talks about how her novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin, raised awareness about slavery and was part of the reason why the Southern states chose to secede from the Union, which started the war. So in number 4, we would say Harriet Beecher Stowe helped end slavery by writing Uncle Tom's Cabin, which historians believe led the Southern states to break away from the North. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the paragraph. We would like you to compare Harriet Tubman and Harriet Beecher Stowe. How are they similar and how are they different? Make sure you have make sure you answer both parts of the question, how they are similar and how they are different, and use evidence from the text to support your answer.